All right. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Lead Better. For those watching live, we're a minute or two late, which is because Mikey's teaching me how to run the dashboard that makes this all happen.
Yeah.
And apparently, I'm a slow learner in some regards. But, Mikey, how are you?
I'm very good. How clean is your car has created a lot of comments today, and I think I know why. I think
Yes.
people are. I think people are a little upset. Like
Okay, well, good. I like this.
From like a make your bed kind of way, right?
Yeah.
Like as if how is it that one thing that you're talking about could encompass all of whether or not you're worthy, right?
Right.
And so there might be some misconceptions in this to clear up a little bit, but it's worth talking about. How clean is your car?
That is the title of the field note, and that's the whole purpose of Lead Better. We discuss the day's field note, and so if you're joining us watching the live chat on Substack or X or wherever, glad you're here. If you're listening to the podcast later, you can benefit by the fact that we actually left it up and we didn't like yank the episode, so there must be something brilliant for you to discern here. So I have some of my own sort of enthusiasms and apprehensions about this field note and what it's advising. It sounds like maybe reflected by some of what you're seeing here. But on the surface level, let me just ask you, Mikey, if you're going to go get your hair cut, and you know what they say, if the barber's got a terrible haircut, or if you're going to go buy some clothes from a tailor who looks awful, it does create some apprehension in you, doesn't it?
Well, I think that might be true with everybody except the barber, because they won't be able to cut their own hair.
But they would know who to go to.
Yes, but right, but that's a different skill. Like the plumber who has a leaky faucet, right? That's a little bit different than the barber.
That is right.
We're cutting hairs here, but yeah, that is the misnomer. We're splitting hairs. The idea that there should be something that shows up that kind of exemplifies that you care about your work. And you care about it so much that it shows up in your personal life as well, right? I don't think that there's necessarily a problem with that thinking, except for, anecdotally, the kind of person who's like, yeah, I do this all the time professionally. I don't want to take the time to do it for myself because I don't really care that much, right?
Could be, right. Well,
for those that want to leave work at home, right?
Let me give the premise of the field note, and then you can tell me where the commenters today and our the many folks around the world who read field notes went. So the theme, for those of you who haven't read the field note, is just using the example of the team of Jimmy Johnson, NASCAR driver, and Chad. I'm guessing it's Knaus. Could be Knaus, right? I guess. I apologize, NASCAR fans who would probably know that by heart. A legendary crew and chief pairing, of what we've got going here. And they had 81 wins, 7 record NASCAR Cup championships. And 5 of those, consecutively. So one of the things that you're doing when you're selecting your pit crew is they have to work together. Like there has to be, it's seamless. In fact, they often have athletes that are part of pit crews, or they drill like they are professional teams, like they are Blue Angel pilots. So one of the things was in the process of selecting potential people to be part of it, Knaus was known for that moment where he, after the interview with that person, can't do this now, nobody could do this now, but would say, well, let me walk you out to the parking lot. Now, he continues to do the interview on the way to the parking lot. He's not trying to just get extra time or ask about the family. He wants to see that person's car because they're going to be there taking care of his car, right? The race car. And he wants to see, if you don't take care of your own car, well, then why are you going to take care of my car? All right. On that level, you want to know this one thing, that seems to make sense. Why would anybody, Mikey Ames, object to this?
Well, if the title of the field note is How Clean is Your Car, the implication might be, if you're not going to actually read to the bottom of it, that the cleanliness of the car is this litmus test to say whether or not you're hireable for any job at all. And that's really where some of the comments are coming from. Like, if you're the employer, one commenter says, and you see my 2 car seats and toys strewn about the floor. Do you not give me the job? Right?
Yeah.
And so my question is, well, in this hypothetical situation, are you applying to be a NASCAR pit crew member? Right? Because the symbolism really applies for that particular job. And our recommendation is not that the litmus test is always going to be about the cleanliness of the car or whether or not your hair is, trimmed or
there's
or
a unique
leaky
thing
faucet.
to this thing that you're looking for, right? And so you want it, and it shows a degree of passion, right, around the subject matter, as it were, right? So I do think. Well, yesterday I had to go to the dentist. I flossed in the morning. Like I usually will floss at night. I flossed in the morning before I went to the dentist. Well, why would you even do that? Because they're going to do that for you when you get to the dentist, right? Well, you think, okay, you're just being polite, right? It's just courtesy.
Yes.
But it's also, you want to be thought of well. I'm a person who takes care of my teeth, right?
Yes.
I think I do.
But it stands to reason in this analogy, which I don't think is just analogous. If you were interviewing as a dentist a new hygienist to come in, and they had spinach between their teeth, does that disqualify them? Right?
Yeah.
You might feel like I caught them off guard. They're right after, right? And whether or not they've got spinach stuck in their teeth from lunch and it's 1 o'clock, or and the dentist isn't going to examine it, but if I can see it across the desk when I'm interviewing you, that might end up being the disqualifying thing without it being the pass-fail test that you have in mind, right? It's just going to be like, how could I possibly hire you this way, right?
Yeah.
So now we're just calling it out. If those things are going to come to your mind, why not decide ahead of time what they are going to be?
Well, one of the nice things is in the very field note itself, it acknowledges that there will be people who say this is unreasonable, this could be unfair. And we have all heard this, whether it's something like this that's an arbitrary test or one of those weird questions you ask in a job screening. But we do know that we're all making symbolic representations and you kind of are who you are all the time, right? You're sort of your own holograph. And so I don't think that there's anything. And yes, you're going to miss some candidates, right? There might be somebody brilliant. Now, I think that's the next thing that I would pose here, which is
you're making these judgments anyway.
Yeah, you are. You definitely are. Yes.
So whether or not you formalize it in your mind or not, these judgments are being made in some way or another, right?
And I would suppose that even for Naus, there were some brilliant people who had cars that might not have perfectly met his standard that he still took onto the team. Because it's a multifactorial thing. Now, you may have a particular thing you're weighing there. But I remember somebody was saying, I think it might have been Naval Ravikant, the most brilliant scientists that we've ever had, the ones that have advanced humanity the most, had horribly organized personal lives.
Right. Yeah.
Their offices looked disheveled. They probably couldn't keep appointments in the right way.
Just look at Einstein's hair. I mean,
yes, right. Yeah. So you wouldn't say, so the point being, there's a certain kind of thing that we expect people to be attentive to for a certain kind of thing. And if you want them to be attentive to the physics of the universe, I'm going to give you some slack on whether you stack your file, your file folders in the right way. Right.
So Bill brings up in our comments another little bit of a pushback, but not just from like a personal, are you going to hire me point of view. He says that this whole field note reminds him of the Stanford marshmallow experiment, where you put the marshmallow out and you're really judging whether or not the child has impulse control enough to delay gratification, right? And then years later, this test supposedly followed up with those participants to see whether or not the delayed gratification being demonstrated was something that created someone who was able to keep a job or maintain success in some way. And the study's often been held up of this virtue that this notion of being able to delay your gratification means a lot.
Yes, right.
So, but he says not everybody bought into it. And in 2018, a study was published that showed that the long-term impacts of delayed gratification were much smaller when controlling for socioeconomic status, home environment, and parental education. So the conclusions turned out to be, complex and heavily dependent on context, right?
Correct.
So, but for maybe 20 years, a lot of people may have over-indexed on that one thing. And so Bill's point here is a good one. I think that if you're going to start this, you should probably track it. You should probably understand what isn't. And
you mean if I hire 10 people for my pit crew and 5 of them had clean cars and 5 of them didn't, who
Yes.
ends up being the better dedicated person on my pit crew?
yes. So, which means that at some point you have to let your impulse go to not have this thing, just so that you're constantly checking your assumptions. So
Yeah.
I don't mind that at all, right? I think the point of the field note is you're going to have these predisposed things anyway that come to mind as to what is and is not disqualifying from a candidate. You might as well choose them ahead of time and be strategic about it.
Right. Well, and we should. This is we're not trying to just tease something coming up because it's actually just something free. It's nothing you even have to buy. But we're going to have our annual community conference in the fall that I think is going to have some of these themes in it. I wouldn't be surprised if we have somebody on that's the head of a a racing pit crew. How do you pick
Right.
people, right? Because we all would want to say, in the same way that when we look at any sort of leadership category, how do you give feedback? How do you make decisions? How do you build relationships? How do you drive performance? How do you drive a race car?
Yes.
We're trying to find what are the best practices, not in isolation, but are there
Yes.
patterns of things that fit into this? And I have a feeling, just as you're saying, track things. You want to hear from more people. You want to run your own tests, but most of us don't have that ability. Like we're not hiring that many people that we can put this to the test. This kind of comes into play, and I think and I love having these discussions. This is why we have been doing these live conversations about the field notes for a couple of years, mainly on X, and now we've broadened it and kind of driven it into the Substack platform. But it's really great fun to think about this. To say, all right, I take this idea for granted that. Well, yeah, I want my kids to make their bed, or I want this, and that's the kind of person I'd like to have on my team.
Yeah.
And what are the things that do matter when it comes to talent selection? And we advise companies on that kind of thing all the time, and there's a lot of different factors that go into how we evaluate.
Right.
But I don't have a problem with any leader saying, I have some things that are critical to me, some things that sort of reflect certain kinds of values. I'm not an absolutist. Right? If you picked up the wrong fork while we were having lunch, I'm not going to disqualify you because then I'm just an idiot. Like I'm just a weirdo. So
Can I ask
that's the
you
thing,
about?
Don't be weird.
Let me ask you about something that may have come up for you as an example of this. So if you're taking a potential journalist that you're thinking about hiring out to lunch, so a reporter or a journalist
Sure.
has a certain way about them where they need to not care about certain people, right? Like look past the idea that I'm not necessarily making friends with this person that I'm interviewing. You need to be friendly, but you're going to be writing the truth here, and so you might. So this notion of the person that you're taking out to lunch, do they treat the wait staff kindly? Is for a lot of people this automatic litmus test that they have. If you took somebody out to lunch and noticed that they didn't even look the person in the eye, they were curt, they were to the wait staff, that's like this disqualifying thing that a lot of us would probably have, whether or not we chose that that's the disqualifying pass-fail test or not. For a journalist, though, would that be kind of like, I kind of want somebody who doesn't care, right?
Well, I would put it this way. What I would probably be doing, and I hired many writers and content creators back in my day when I was in sort of full-time journalism and media, and I would be looking for a certain kind of persistence, and certainly. I remember there was a famous quote by a guy who had been executive editor, I think, of the New York Post, who said, we're trying to hire wild animals here as reporters, people that are tenacious, they're going to go out there, they're going to dig. And so if they kind of if you're going to hire wild animals, you can't complain if they scratch the furniture, meaning I'm going to be a little tolerant of that. And I've worked with a lot of weird people, right? So I do want a tenacity. But in a universal world, you are looking for the kind of people that are really on the spot, detectives, psychologists, salespeople. They're able to bond. They're able to find the way in, because belligerence isn't going to get you in the door. Sometimes you need to press when it's uncomfortable to press. But I don't think most people in a job luncheon that you're going to for an interview are going to be abusive to the wait staff. More importantly, I'm going to be looking for, where do you get curious? I'm not going to actually probably try to cue it up for this to happen. But if you were the kind of person that actually started to engage somebody and ask them questions, like if they, had a particular pin that said that they were, like sometimes you go in and you'll see if they're in, maybe if you're at Disney or something, it says what country they're from, right? And you'd be like, well, wow, you were raised in Ghana. How long have you been in the U.S.? Like,
Right.
Do you go back very often? So if I'm looking for somebody who's going to find it to be able to create rapport and ask questions, I'm looking for how they're doing that all the time and not just with me, right?
Right.
And I do believe in the way that now walked people out to their car. I, in reverse, have always said to people, when you're being interviewed and when like you're waiting in the lobby of whatever building you're going to interview in, when the person comes down to greet you and gets you walking back to the office, the interview starts right then. And you have a tremendous opportunity as the interview subject to begin demonstrating everything you want to show that person very casually. Just as you walk back and you start talking to them about the building, how long they've been there. I usually, this is a little off topic, and I know we're right at the end of our time period here, but I always would, when I was advising people on job interviews, I would always say, before you get back to their office and you're sitting down, try to find your way to the question where you say, okay, you've been in broadcasting, or you've been in sales, or you've been in leadership coaching. How did you start? Where was your first opportunity? How did you get that opportunity? Now, I've usually done a little research on the person, but what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to get them into a point where they're empathetic with where I am. Because when they put themselves back into that mindset, now they're in my mindset. Now they're more open to where I am. Now, if I'm interviewing somebody like a pit crew chief and I'm seeing this person and they're engaging with me like that, I'm putting them up the ladder whether or not their car is perfectly clean. But I do think that it's okay to evaluate people on those critical functions, but don't make it the only thing.
Sure.
How's that?
Sure. Yeah.
Is that a good conclusion?
I love it. Let's talk tomorrow, shall we?
Let's do it. All right. Thank
Okay.
you all, everybody. See you next Lead Better.
Bye now.